Picciola, adapted from Saintine. Read by Lawrence Cuda. Many years ago, a good man who lived in France was thrown into prison because the king suspected him of having plotted against the government. Within 4 gray stone walls, with only one small window through which the little stream of sunshine came, the poor man was kept captive for months and years. He was not allowed to speak to a living soul except his jailer, who at best was but a cross old fellow. He had no work to do. There were no books to read, and his only source of amusement during many long tedious hours was drawing pictures with a bit of charcoal on the bare stone walls of his prison cell. Fortunately, however, the poor captive was permitted to leave his cell for 1 hour each morning and go up a narrow, winding stairway which led him into a small courtyard, on all sides of which rose high, strong prison walls. Here the prisoner could breathe the fresh air and feel the warm sun, and by looking up he could see a bit of the blue sky above. Day after day the prison life went on in the same round, without any change or hope of change. The bitterness and loneliness of the poor man's lot grew upon him as months and years passed, without a word from his family or friends, and without hope of ever seeing one of them again. And by, a time came when he could no longer even find amusement in sketching upon the walls of his cell, for not one vacant spot was left in all that space where he could draw a picture. He was a very unhappy man indeed, and it is hard to say how it might have ended. But one day a new interest came into his life, an interest which changed the poor fellow from an unhappy, bitter man who had come to hate everybody and everything, into one who forgot all wrong and who learned to see only the good and the beautiful in all around him. And this interest came about through the growing up of a tiny stray seed which had been blown into the courtyard by the wind, and had taken root between 2 of the great stones with which the courtyard was paved. It happened that one day, as the prisoner was taking his daily walk, his eyes caught sight of the bright green of the little seedling, just in time to save it from being crushed beneath his foot. He stopped and looked closer. Then he saw how a little plant had sent down its rootlets into the crevice between the stones and had struggled to push its head up, where its green leaves might catch what they could of the scant sunshine. He thought how wonderful it was that the little seed had found courage to take root and struggle for life in the dark and gloomy courtyard of the prison. "Brave little plant," he said. "You deserve to live. I shall watch over you and guard you, for the wind and the hail are hard enemies." Day by day he noticed how bravely it grew higher and unfolded one leaf after another to the dull sunshine. He became more and more interested in this little nursling, which in time was like a dear friend and companion to him. He called it Picciola, which means little one. And before many days had passed, it had taken root and grown in his own heart, so that there was no longer room for bitterness or memory of any wrongs. At one time, when a great hailstorm sent its cruel hail into the courtyard, the prisoner bent over Picciola to protect it, and the driving hailstones fell upon his own head until the storm was over. "My poor little Picciola," he said, "I shall not always be here to guard you from harm. Much can happen to my little plant when I am in my cell. I will build a little fence around you. Then the wind cannot blow you down, nor the hail cut you with sharp stones." The cross jailer, too, took an interest in Picciola when he saw how happy the prisoner had become, and he was glad to help take care of the little plant. Somehow the jailer did not seem to be such a cross fellow as before. Indeed, he seemed to be quite a gentle and kind-hearted man. Now the prisoner was very happy, and the days were no longer weary and without interest, for Picciola was always waiting for him in the courtyard, and he was sure to see something new about the little plant each morning he visited it. And Picciola grew and grew, and in time put forth 2 beautiful blossoms, and sent perfume to make glad the heart of her friend. But alas, one morning when the prisoner went to look at Picciola, he found that, in spite of all his care, she had begun to droop and wither. What could be the matter? In a moment he was on the ground examining the little plant to find out what was causing all the trouble. He soon discovered that Picciola had grown so large that there was no longer enough room for it to grow in the crevice between the stones. The sharp edges of the stones cut into the delicate stem, and the poor prisoner could see that his little companion would die unless the stones could be lifted. He was in great distress. He tried with all the strength he had to lift the stones himself, but he could not move them. He begged the jailer to help him. "I can do nothing for you," said the jailer. "You must ask the king. He alone has the power to say that the stones should be lifted." "But the king is far away," said the prisoner. "There is but one way to reach him. I must write." The poor fellow in despair sent a letter to the king, begging him to save the life of his little friend Picciola. The letter was written on a white handkerchief with a bit of charcoal. He begged the king, not for his own freedom and life, but for the life of Picciola. As soon as the king finished reading the prisoner's letter, he said, "This man is not really wicked at heart. The stone shall be raised that the little plant may live, and I will pardon this prisoner because of his great love and sacrifice for so helpless a thing as Picciola." So the prisoner was released, and when he left his lonely prison cell, he took Picciola with him, for she had been the beginning of a new happiness for him.
A production of We Are One Body Audio Theater.